The Toyota 1000 Desert Race this year celebrated its 30th anniversary, and a special guest was Kees van Wijgarden, who was a founder member of the Four-Wheel Drive Club of Southern Africa, which has organized the race since its inception.
Well, we were 14 people who started this club. All 14 of us, plus a couple of others. There might have been 20 people. Yeah, everybody who was a member was on the organizing committee of the Desert Race. So it was then called the Trek Trans-Kalahari Race. That's how we started. Trek being the name of the fuel that was available at the time. But then they pulled out, and then it became the Total Trans-Kalahari Race. So yeah, we've come a long way.
The early days saw competitors race 500 kilometers to an overnight camp in the bush and then race 500 kilometers back to the finish the next day. The crowds remain, but race organization is a lot slicker.
Now, there have always been crowds, but this is far more controlled than it used to be in the olden days. I mean, we had an overnight stop, and an overnight stop was chaos because of all the crowds. But this is far more controlled and it's far more organized, and it makes sense the way it's being done now.
The early days of the Toyota 1000 Desert Race had a rough and ready feel about it. A heavy hammer, pliers and wires, the necessary equipment.
Oh yes, it's completely professional. From our day was, you know, the guy in his backyard fixing his Volkswagen Beetle and putting bigger wheels on, and that was his car. He was the mechanic, he was the driver, he was everything. And those were, yeah, that was what it was like. It's changed considerably, obviously.
A scene like this would give a current clerk of the course apoplexy, and the technical evolution in terms of machinery and navigational aids has over the years changed the face of off-road racing. The Toyota 1000 Desert Race has had to move with the times.
What do they call it? I'm from the generation of no cell phones, no GPSs, no computers, nothing. We had a map, and we used to go and find the routes with a map. And we'd ask the locals, we'd say, listen, we want to get to that such and such a place. How do we get there? They said, oh, you've got to go down that way. I said, no, but it looks like there's a little track going here, and we'd find these things. A lot of dead ends, of course, that we'd follow and that sort of thing in the beginning. But yeah, we got there. The race was organized. It was 1,000 kilometers long. It always has been, and it's still today 1,000 kilometers, which is a magic number, I think. And it was done in 2 loops, 2 days.
A walk down memory lane and a fascinating look at the origins of the Toyota 1000 Desert Race. But it's back to the present on another freezing cold morning in Kumakwani, with a new innovation adding another dimension to the race. Teams who failed to finish day 2 could rejoin the race and would be eligible for half points. The ruling would give teams involved in championship battles the opportunity to salvage something from the race, and would also provide extra entertainment for the crowds.
With just 18 seconds separating the first 2 special vehicles, there was going to be early pressure.
Yeah, everybody wants to win, you know. There's a lot of cars back there. Yeah, hopefully the pace is, we've got the pace to stay in the front and keep it clean without making any trouble and hurting the car. So our goal is still simple. It's just to get back to the pits in one piece. We're still here for a finish, so we just got to go get this first 200k loop done, and we'll take it from there.
Former South African champion Evan Hutchison has an impressive record in off-road racing and rallying, but a win on the Toyota 1000 Desert Race was missing from his CV. Co-driver Dani Stassen is also a South African rally champion, and after an iffy start to the year, the pair was starting to show some sort of form. Starting 18 seconds behind the Motorrad car, reigning SA champions Cully and Quinton Silwart were looking for a repeat of their 2007 Desert Race triumph, and once again, vociferous enthusiasts had turned up in their droves to give competitors a resounding send-off.
The Toyota service crew had worked a minor overnight miracle, and the Anthony Taylor Chris Birkin Castrol Toyota Hilux bore little resemblance to the battered and bruised vehicle that had finished the previous afternoon. The Toyota Hilux looked as though it had just rolled off a showroom floor, with the crew enjoying a lead of just over 4.5 minutes over the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux of Gary Bertholdt and Andre Vermeulen. The highly experienced Vermeulen is another off-road competitor with extensive rally experience and is one of a select band of co-drivers who have won national championship events in both disciplines.
The 210-kilometer northeast loop of the race was almost the same as last year and would also be run twice during the day. The route had been opened up and was not as tight as was the case for last year's Toyota 1000 Desert Race.
The The Toyota Desert Race suits the Motorite Revo more than any other event on the ABSA Championship calendar, and Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen quickly stretched their lead over Cully and Quinton Sulwald from 18 to 51 seconds. As they had done throughout the race, the Sulwalds were maintaining a steady pace without any dramas.
There was early drama, though, in the production vehicle category when the Gary Bertolt Andre Vermeulen Atlas Copco Toyota was forced to retire with broken front differential brackets. That gave frontrunners Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin an increased lead, and hopes of a first Toyota 1000 Desert Race win since 1999 were given a big boost. For Taylor and Birkin, it was now a case of smooth and fast, and no mistakes.
Young enthusiasts were out in force along the route and are surprisingly well informed when it comes to cars and crews. Johan van Staden and James Rousseau were building up a head of steam, but for at least one man and his best friend, off-road racing was nothing to get excited about. The demise of the Atlas Copco Toyota lifted Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst into third place in the factory Team Ford Ranger, with the South African champions hoping for a better day. During racing section 2, the pair had 3 punctures, power steering problems, an altercation with a tree, and in Visser's words, the gearbox and prop shaft were not happy.
Other than that, everything was okay, but a Ford service crew also worked late to get the Ranger TDCI tip-top shape. But Visser and Badenhorst had dropped to 17 minutes behind Taylor and Birkin and had a big hill or two to climb.
There were also copies that needed climbing for Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau in the Verigo Bat, who had dropped to 20 minutes behind the special vehicle leaders. They were being chased by Jaap and Hicho de Bruin, who now found themselves third among the production vehicles in the Michelin XL Toyota Hilux. Camping in the bush and watching motor racing is a relaxing way to spend a weekend, but there was no time for relaxation for crews. Meanwhile, the experienced Terence Marsh and rookie co-driver George Smallberger on his first desert race had quietly slipped into the top 5 in the production vehicle category with an early puncture, a minor setback for the Regent Racing Nissan Navara crew.
It was all falling into place for Regent Racing, with Archie Rutherford and Mike Lawrenson still running at the front of the Class P field in their Jimco. Yanni Visser and Joks Leroux were pushing hard in the International Toyota Hilux, and there was a contrast in the Cizanani Plastics Bat in 5th place among the special vehicles, with Brett Parker having his first desert race outing, while Andrew van Zyl is a former winner. Behind them were another rookie and former winner, with Richard Fuller and Jeff Minott running second in Class P.
There was more frustration for former South African champion Duncan Vos and Rob Howie in the second factory Castrol Toyota Hilux. The fuel pressure problem of the previous day had come back to haunt them. After finishing second on the Donaldson Prologue, the fuel starvation problem saw Vos and Howie gradually drop down the production vehicle pecking order. Now they were again stuttering along and eventually pulled off the road and made cell phone contact with team principal Glenn Hall.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we stopped. We've checked it's not blocked.
But you listen to the noise it's making. It just seems it's making a funny noise. The pump.
And it's making a funny noise. It's, the pumps aren't pumping. They're not. It's like they're not picking up fuel.
Well, they're cavitating.
They're cavitating.
After the short interlude with their team principal, Vos and Howie rejoined the race, and making it to the compulsory service halt was now their major objective. By contrast to the Toyota crew, Herman and Wichert Sulwald were having a much better day. Adjusting suspension settings on the Sulwald Racing SVR had cured their handling problems, and the pair were starting to make up ground. The Sulwalds had jumped ahead of the Cobalt Racing Porter of Jimmy Zahos and Stefan Kutsia, which had run out of brakes, and a string of production vehicles that included the RFS BMW X3 of Pretoria pair, Christian de Plooy and Henk Janssen van Vieren.
There were no early problems for the RFS BMW, but de Plooy and Janssen van Vieren were being closed down by Malcolm Koch and Johan Berger, who were on a charge in the Koch & Sons Toyota Hilux. Koch is a cousin of Chris and Jannie Visser, and his father Andre is a former winner of the Toyota 1000 Desert Race. Also making good progress were Willem and Dana Vos in the Vossies Toyota Hilux. In-car camera footage from the Vos car amply illustrates how important it is to stay on the track on the Toyota Desert Race. Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin know all about trees and more trees, waiting to punish mistakes, and hidden tree stumps and rocks, known in the trade as lurkers, are a constant danger when it comes to punctures.
There was another encouraging run for Nick Gosler and Andrew Massey, who were holding down a steady third place in Class P at the Men's Health International Zarco. Behind them, brothers David and Gary White were having a weekend to forget and were still struggling in their Rubicon bat. They dropped a place to Goslar and Massey and were being chased by Jacques Wheeler and Philip Husselman in the Orange Works bat, none the worse for altercations with a couple of trees. Local crew Osman Sadiq and Kasim Dada were determined to finish the only race they enter throughout the year, while Cliff Weichelt and Johan Smallberger were among the Day 2 dropouts who were back in the race and had moved to the front of Class D. They were now ahead of the Land Rover of championship leaders Jack and Sarel Oosthuizen, who grind out results through the persistence and durability which saw them arrive in Botswana with a 100% finish record.
The aging Toyota Hilux of Pit Kotze and Salomon Victor still led Class E, but charging up behind them were championship leaders Thomas Rundle and John Moore, who were also back in the race and chasing consolation points in the Baden Tyre Services Missa Navarra. They had quickly overhauled teenagers Jason Venter and Vincent van Alleman in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux, with Naim Musaji and Rehan Badania back with him in the Maxxis Tyre Rack Porter. Also back in the race were Swaziland crew John Thompson and Clinton McNamara in Class P, and Class A runners Bulla Bottas and Johan Pretorius, who were destined to retire for a second time. Also heading for a second retirement were Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable in the second of the factory Ford Ranger TDCI entries. In Class B, the Raysonic Zarko of Kutsia Labuskachny and daughter Sandra was also back in the race, and leading brothers Keith and Andrew Macanetti in another Zarko.
Heavy rains caused the organisers to eliminate certain sections of last year's route. It now took the competitors on heading northeast of racequarters at Kumakwani. There was about 50 kilometres of new terrain on the way to the Kapong Road. And then the tough stuff really started.
The popularity of the Toyota 1000 Desert Race was again in evidence by the hordes of enthusiasts who flocked to favourite vantage points at river and road crossings. First on the road and still leading the special vehicles were Evan Hutchison and Dani Stassen, with the Motorite Revo now a minute clear of Cully and Quinton Sewald, who were concerned about an overheating gearbox. The elegant fuel bat had maintained a steady pace throughout the Donaldson prologue, and the race with the Sewalds not about to take any unnecessary risks.
In the production vehicle category, Anthony Taylor and Chris Birkin were firmly in charge of proceedings in the Team Castrol Toyota Hilux. They were being followed by former Class B champions Johan van Staden and James Rousseau, who'd fallen 15 minutes behind the leaders in their Atlas Copco bat. Van Staden and Rousseau had picked up 2 non-finishes in a row and were desperate to stop the rot with a good result on an event that offered extra points to finishers who completed the prologue and then both racing sections. The gap between the Taylor Birkin Toyota and the Visser Badenhorst Ford Ranger had now stretched to an imposing 15 minutes, with the Toyota team starting to tighten the noose.
You have to give Botswana fans full marks for the enthusiasm they maintained throughout the race. Meanwhile, hopes of a 4th straight Toyota 1000 Desert Race victory were fading for Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau, with the Varigo Racing bat now nearly 20 minutes adrift of the leaders. Hicho and Jaap de Bruin were still in a solid 3rd place among the production vehicles, with the Michelin XL Toyota Hilux showing no external effects of a tough race. Former professional cricketer Terence Marsh revels in long-distance races, and with navigator George Smallberger looking to have quickly settled into the hot seat, the Regent Racing Navarra crew were looking comfortable with the only blip on their radar, the early puncture that had not caused them a major delay in terms of time lost.
The Regent Racing pair were running just ahead of teammates Archie Rutherford and Mike Lawrenson, who were in the Class P driving seat. Closing in on them were Northwest Province veterans Jannie Visser and Yorks Leroux in the International Toyota Hilux, who were an impressive 4th in the production vehicle category. Also impressive was the form shown by Brett Parker in the Sizanani Plastics Gymco, who was hugely enjoying his first desert race, along with former winner Andrew van Sail. The other rookie and previous winner combination of Richard Fuller and Jeff Minnett were going along steadily, with the Atlas Copco bat lying 2nd in Class P.
The Sewald SVR of Herman and Richard Sewald was sounding healthy, with the father and son pair from Palabora maintaining a steady gap between themselves and the Cobalt Racing Porter of Jimmy Zahos and Stefan Kutsia. Zahos is a former quad racer with his let-it-all-hang-out style always entertaining. The two special vehicles were still ahead of the RFS BMW X3 of Christian de Ploy and Henk Janse van Vieren. De Ploy and Janse van Vieren were often the victims of mistaken identity, with many fans thinking the petrol-driven BMW was the diesel X3 of Botswana hero and six-time desert race winner Hannes Grobler, who was forced to retire the previous day.
The front end of the Malcolm Koch Johan Burger Toyota Hilux had been slightly modified, but the Northwest crew were motoring along as quickly as ever. Behind them, the Castrol Toyota Hilux, a three-time desert race winner Duncan Foss and Rob Howie, was intact, with the fuel pressure problem appearing to be an intermittent occurrence that came and went, leaving the crew hugely frustrated. All hopes of a second ABSA Off-Road Championship win in a row disappeared for Foss and Howie, who were now intent on salvaging as many championship points as they could possibly muster. Survival was not an issue for Nick Gosler and Andrew Massey, with the Men's Health Zarco crew perhaps the revelation of the season. They were running just ahead of the Class A car of brothers David and Gary White, who had Class D leaders Cliff Weichelt and Johan Smallberger hot on their heels. Right behind the N1 4x4 Toyota Land Cruiser was the Orange Works bat of Jacques Wheeler and Philip Hurselman, with a special cheer going up for local crew Osman Sadiq and Kasim Dada in a Nissan Navara, carrying the scars of battle.
Still charging through the field were Thomas Rundle and Joan Moore with the Baden Tyre Services Nissan Navara crew on a mission to salvage precious championship points. Jack Oosthuizen and Son Sorrel were going along at a much more sedate pace, with the Land Rover crew in a good position to further consolidate their Class D championship lead. Class E leaders Pit Kotze and Salomon Victor were now without power steering and were rapidly being caught by Kutsia and Sandra Labuskaghni, who were leading Class B in the Raysonic Zarco and also in search of valuable championship points.
Playing catch-up with Louis Weichelt and Francis Bushman, the second N1 4x4 Toyota Land Cruiser, who were trying to catch the Oosthuizen Land Rover. Keith and Andrew Machanete were trying to make up ground on the Labuskaghnis, with a gap between the two Zarcos now almost 11 minutes.